few of the things you can see that civilian workforce brings as a benefit to us. And we'll talk about being stewards of the environment here too. It's very, very important to us, and you'll see by some of the landscape that we have. And we're always working on partnerships, and we appreciate opportunities like this where we can talk about the base and our impact. So emissions, this is just a rough overview, and as you can tell, I like to do pictures rather than words. In the upper left, we've got that research and test I talked about. Many different things up there as far as in the air realm and also in the surface realm. The Navy takes pride in that we can do underway replenishment, whether that be fuel or supplies, and that's in one of the pictures there where you see the Humvee in the air. We developed that. A lot of weapons testing out on the range. The most instrumented range in the world is offshore here. So when we want to fly weapons and we want to make sure they're doing what they say they're supposed to do, that's where we can test them. Also in the lower right of that upper left box is our self-defense test ship, which is the only full-scale ship in the Navy that's run completely remote control. We fire weapons at it, and it defends itself. And the folks that run that would say we must be doing something right because it's still floating. And then aviation, the upper right, that's all over at Magoo, and as you can see, a wide variety. We're not like your typical Lemoore Naval Air Station, which is all fighters up there. We have unmanned aircraft in the upper left there and in the middle, and a variety of manned aircraft too, and we get a lot of transient here. So we don't always have tactical jets here, but we get them quite often to do things. And we have a good partnership with the Coast Guard, which is growing. They've been operating here for over about a year. And down lower left, everything in Winimi is all Seabees. So they have 3 battalions over there, also underwater construction team, and also their schoolhouses over there. So they're our largest military population. They're over there. And a whole bunch of other stuff. In the Navy's wisdom, they put an aviator in charge of a port. And we have a good partnership with the commercial port there in the lower left. And we're seeing a lot of gray hulls coming in. And that big orange ship there is the Ocean Giant, which supplies Antarctica in the deep freeze mission. And it comes up here and gets supplies. Also, the Navy's only satellite operations command is here, controlling 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, Navy satellites that are up in the air. All right, and our natural resources, so you can, I won't read through it all there to you, but a huge coastal wetland over on Magoo. We could not today build that same base in that same place because of the natural resources there. So we understand that. We work together with those natural resources. In Joe's department, he has the environmental folks who are very good and capable group in our command that we work together to get mission accomplishment while preserving the environment. And water is a big part of that in the wetlands over there, and we have many, many endangered species that we have taken pride on preserving and even flourishing. And the island is also San Nicolas Island. We have a lot of them out there that we do take pride in preserving. And we realize that the coastal area is very important to this wildlife because of the other development in other areas, forcing that wildlife to come to us. You know, the most important thing to take away here from this slide about the water supply context is that we currently purchase our water from Port Hueneme Water Agency and also in United Water Conservation District in lieu of extracting. And our goal there is because we want to protect the aquifer and prevent the saltwater intrusion. We do have a well over on Port Hueneme called Well 22, but it's really a standby source. We pull a little bit for irrigation over there, but it can be connected later to our water system. But it's important in us to protect that aquifer. And we have the PHWA that you see we abbreviated up there is they manage our groundwater credits, but we retain our water rights. And we've been an ex officio member there is listed on the PHWA since about 2011. And we have, as you can see from all of our missions, we have many uses of the water. Obviously, drinking water, we have about 1,800 family housing units on a base in Hueneme and also Point Magoo. And then we have another housing area out in the city Camarillo. So they utilize drinking water for like everyone else does. We have also industrial uses. Irrigation, we have really curtailed And my boss has dictated that we exceed the goals set by the governor in water conservation. So we're really striving to do that. We'll take a hit on appearance over saving some water on the base. And also we're looking for other ways to conserve water in like our sports field, installing artificial turf and preserving that way. And then one of our biggest things that people don't realize is our building codes have really gotten more strict when it comes to storing aircraft in hangars. They must have automatic fire protection systems with AFFF, and that requires a huge amount of flow if something bad were to happen. So all of the new hangars that we're modifying, you saw a lot of those new platforms, they require a lot of fire protection, and that means a lot needs to be stored and be used at a moment's notice to do that. I think here we're at the point where I'm going to hand off to Amanda, and then I'll come back in at the end.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman West and members of the board. Again, my name is Amanda Fagan, and I'm the Community Planning Liaison Officer for Naval Base Ventura County. Groundwater is critical to military sustainability, resiliency, and compatibility for Naval Base Ventura County. With regard to sustainability, Naval Base Ventura County needs to preserve access to sufficient water supply in order to meet both current and future mission requirements. The 2015 Naval Base Ventura County Joint Land Use Study highlights this connection to sustainability. The Joint Land Use Study found that saltwater intrusion due to overdraft in the groundwater basin can impact water quality in the area, including resources used by the installation. The Joint Land Use Study recommended that the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency update the 2007 Groundwater Management Plan to incorporate provisions and coordination with military operations in the area to ensure improvements do not adversely impact NBVC facilities and operations. The ongoing groundwater sustainability plan process presents an opportunity to implement this JLIS recommendation. As the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency implements the Groundwater Management Act and develops its groundwater sustainability plan, Naval Base Ventura County desires to take a more active role in order to preserve access to sufficient water supply to meet our current and future mission requirements, to ensure access to groundwater as a standby and emergency water source, and to support sufficient water supplies to preserve compatible land uses, including agriculture around Point Mugu. With regards to resiliency, Naval Base Ventura County must maintain access to water supplies, including groundwater, to ensure resiliency, redundancy, and access to an emergency water supply. Some of the public discussions surrounding groundwater sustainability planning and modeling have proposed restrictions on pumping within a saltwater intrusion management area that runs along the coast and covers both Point Mugu and Port Hueneme. We have long recognized the need to cooperate with neighboring jurisdictions and water providers to protect the aquifer from saltwater intrusion, as evidenced by the 1996 agreement with Port Hueneme Water Agency. However, in the event of an emergency or a natural disaster, such as an earthquake or wildfire or other disaster that impacts infrastructure, we need to maintain access to our standby water sources, including the 2 groundwater extraction wells at Point Mugu and Port Hueneme. Resiliency reflects ensuring available water supplies to meet national security and other missions, and to serve and support the broader community and the nation in the event of an emergency. NBVC and our tenant commands play many important roles in contingency plans for natural disasters and other emergencies throughout the West Coast, including the U.S. Coast Guard search and rescue missions, the Channel Islands Air National Guard's airlift, medical and tactical evacuation, and aerial firefighting missions. Our CBs providing personnel and equipment for response capability, our mutual aid and emergency response agreements with local governments surrounding us, as well as our airfield and port operations. Simply put, in the event of an emergency, such as a major earthquake in Southern California or likewise, it's important for MBVC to be operational and ready to respond. Within the context of groundwater, in addition to maintaining sufficient water supplies to meet current and future mission requirements, which is considered a municipal and industrial use, it's also important to Naval Base Ventura County to support adequate available water supplies to preserve compatible land uses surrounding Point Mugu, including agriculture. Our broader compatibility objective is to promote compatible growth, sustain environmental and economic health, and protect public health, safety, and welfare, while protecting the viability of current and future missions at MBVC. A variety of compatibility challenges can impact the training, testing, and operational missions, such as competition for air, land, and sea space and scarce natural resources. The 2015 Naval Base Ventura County Joint Land Use Study assessed 25 compatibility factors, ranging from air quality, anti-terrorism force protection, energy development, frequency spectrum, noise and vibration, and water quality and quantity. The Joint Land Use Study identified 82 compatibility issues and 136 strategies to address those issues. That study was completed under the local sponsorship of the Ventura County Transportation Commission in partnership with the base as well as the County of Ventura, the cities of Camarillo, Port Hueneme, and Oxnard, the Oxnard Harbor District, and a variety of other stakeholders, as well as significant outreach to the general public. So Naval Base Ventura County uses a number of tools to assess and encourage compatible land uses. In addition to the Joint Land Use Study, we have an encroachment action plan, an economic impact assessment, the Air Installations Compatible Use Zone, or ACUS study, which defines our noise and safety footprint for the installation. And finally, our Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration, or REPI program. The REPI program may be of interest to this group in particular in that it supports cost-sharing partnerships between the military services, private conservation groups, and state and local governments, and allows us to acquire easements or other interests in land from willing sellers to preserve compatible land uses and sustain wildlife habitat near the installations and ranges where the military operates, tests, and trains. So we do have an existing encroachment protection agreement as part of that REPI program with the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, and the City of Oxnard, which can be used to purchase easements from willing sellers who are interested in that program. So all of these tools inform our review of and response to the groundwater sustainability planning efforts. Recognizing the importance of water and groundwater to military sustainability, resiliency, and compatibility, we have an interest in staying engaged with the development of the groundwater sustainability plan. A letter to the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency dated May 17th, so brand new, you may not have actually seen it yet, from the Department of Defense Regional Environmental Coordinator, outlines the unique aspects of the federal government and its ability and limits to be regulated by local government and pay certain charges, including the groundwater extraction fee. However, we are committed to exploring collaborative approaches and to work through any groundwater management issues. By way of an example, the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency includes Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake commanding officer as an ex officio associate member. The Joint Powers Agreement that established that GSA acknowledges the fiscal limits to the Navy to participate and also recognizes technical assistance, information sharing, field studies, and other ways that the Navy is able to contribute to the overall process. In participating in the Fox Canyon GSP development, our goals and objectives address ensuring sufficient water supply to meet current and future mission requirements, clearly outlining federal water allocations in the GSP, ensuring access to an emergency water supply in the event of natural or man-made emergencies or disasters, and supporting sufficient water quality, or water supply rather, to support compatible land uses, including agriculture, in the Oxnard Plain to protect Point Mugu. We recognize that Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency was established by the state legislature and has a longstanding organizational history, which affects the organizational construct for the GSA moving forward. Our desire and intent is simply to play a more active role in the groundwater management and water sustainability planning process and implementation, such as through ex officio representation on the technical advisory group or participation in any stakeholder advisory groups that may be established moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Captain Yankee once more.
So just in summary, as you can see from both of our parts of the brief here, we have a really diverse set of mission sets that are there that not only we have to support, but our tenants are executing, and that water is critical to those missions. And we think that the groundwater sustainment plan presents an opportunity that we can implement the J-list. It was a great effort that I came in the end, the J-list was doing, and I think now we're getting there. We got to move some of these things across the goal line. I think this is one of the great opportunities to do that. And I think this opportunity can explore partnership and opportunities. And I also realized through the brief that we probably threw about 1 million acronyms at you throughout the brief. As many pictures as were in the brief, we probably threw you acronyms. But that's the Navy. So I really want to, in wrapping up, I really want to say that we appreciate this opportunity. Any opportunity that we have to work better in a partnership, especially as something as critical as water and sustainment of that, we really are glad that we could have this time to show this to you. And with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Captain. I think on behalf of the board, certainly we'd all like to thank you for your service and for your presentation. I think we'd all look forward to increased engagement with Naval Base Ventura County, particularly as we move forward in project planning on the supply side of the sustainability agenda. So thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Chairman,
Yes,
may I ask some questions?
by all means. Captain,
Captain?
some board members have questions yet.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for coming in and making the presentation to us.
Sure.
The question that I have for you is, we've obviously seen the letters go back and forth between the DOD and our staff about the inability in order to contribute to the groundwater extraction fees, as that is a impediment for you to be able to do that. But going forward, we are faced with a very real possibility here that there's going to be significant cuts within the Oxnard Plain as far as groundwater allocations. To go along with that, there's also projects that are being planned and surcharges or fees that the other pumpers in the basin are willing to add on top of the existing in order to pay for those new sources. Going forward, does the Navy see any ability or any desire to contribute to that, or are you going to provide in lieu services to those pumpers around you that are paying for those new supplies and those new and bearing those new expenses?
Okay. Thank you,
I'll take
Mary.
that one. So with respect to some of the proposed supply side fees that have that I've seen in initial draft concepts, as they're currently construed and presented in the draft documents, similar to the groundwater extraction fee, our attorneys are telling us we wouldn't be able to pay them as they're currently construed. Now, if they were tied to a direct benefit to the Navy, then there may be some opportunity for us to contribute. And also on the more direct project-related basis, then we could consider that. So as you know, as I tried to emphasize, we are interested in exploring partnerships to include this, supply side, whether it's the possibility of using land or technical expertise that we have the access to, for example, through the NAVFAC Expeditionary Warfare Center, which has a number of highly specialized technical experts who work on reverse osmosis technology development and other things. So there is an interest in participating where we can within our fiscal and constitutional limits.
One other point for clarification then. As we go forward again, and we're again stating that there is very real possibility that there will be allocation cutbacks for M&I and Ag going forward out in the Oxnard Plain, is the Navy bound to stay within those constraints, or do you have the ability in order to say under national interest, you're not going to be cut back?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think that's something we'd have to look into, because this issue is becoming more and more of interest to our regional bosses down in San Diego, and when we talk about the NAVFAC and council down there, that's who we're consulting with, who are the big experts on this. So that's something we'll have to look at and say. I couldn't give you a good answer right now.
It certainly is the elephant in the room.
Absolutely.
Well, for your board's information, we are working the issue at the staff level. In fact, we have an ex-Navy captain working it. And they were able to find the language that was needed on Guam to do something similar. So there's some hopes that that will happen here too. So we're not blind to that. We are working it, but we don't have anything to report yet.
Are you talking about the intergovernmental service agreements?
Yes.
Okay.
I think
Yeah,
Edwin
so
Shepherd, you guys have talked about
we seem to have broken, this is in other areas unrelated maybe to water, just services. One of the things that we've discussed in the past is maybe possibly large, heavy vehicle maintenance where the county and very few other places have the ability to do that. And
Yeah, I'm talking about actually the water. There was a water service on Guam where there was a similar problem with federal fees. He was the commander at that base. They worked through the issue successfully, and he has the same hopes for this one. But we don't have anything to report yet, so we'll get back to it as it develops.
Okay.
Similar to it's new for all of us right now.
Okay, be interested to hear more on that too.
Before you leave, any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public for the captain? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 3, update on the GREAT program.
Good afternoon, Chairman West and members of the board. I'm Daniel Weidberg, the Public Works Director for the City of Oxnard, and I'm going to give you an update on our recycled water program. In preparing for this, I realized we hadn't given you an update since 2013, which just seemed like yesterday, but between then and now is a drought that changed things significantly, some for the good and some for the bad for the program. So I'll talk about that as we go along here. Oh, okay, sorry. Is that better? Yeah, I can actually hear myself now. So, okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly about the original plan and what's changed kind of together. So the original plan was to build a full advanced treatment plant. So that's microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and advanced oxidation of hydrogen peroxide with ultraviolet. That's what we built. Current capacity is 6 million gallons per day, or about 7,000 acre feet per year. Under the current amount of wastewater flows that we have, we could produce probably about 12 million gallons per day, or 14,000 acre feet a year. That would require some seasonal and daily storage to be able to process all that, but that's about roughly what we can process. The drought has reduced our wastewater by about 20%. We were up in the 22, 23 million gallons a day. Now we're down to 18 or 19 million gallons a day. So because of that, we're starting to look more towards stormwater for future expansion of the plant, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. The other uses that were originally planned, one of them was seawater barrier wall. For a number of reasons, that was not something that was pursued. There was issues in locating where it should be. There was the realization that we need a lot more wells than originally anticipated, so the cost was significantly increasing to do that. And then changes in regulations allowed for other uses of the water, so that's something that was not implemented. But the crop irrigation is being implemented. The recycled water in lieu of potable, both for irrigation and soon for industrial use within the city, is being implemented. One of the other things that we were originally planning on, but what hasn't worked out, is the recharge of aquifers using the mining pits north of River Park, so just north of town, next to the development. turns out that just the hydrogeology of the area is not really conducive to this. There's too many wells that would be impacted close to those areas, so it's not an area that would be conducive to recharge without a lot of work. But as I mentioned, the regulations have changed for indirect reuse using aquifer storage and recovery wells, so that's something that we're pursuing now. And then the other thing that we're working with United on maybe using some of their recharge basins at certain times for recharge. So in terms of revenue and cost recovery, there were some assumptions made in the original plan. One of the big one was that 50% of the cost would be either grants or cost recovery, and that actually, as of right now, we have about 20%, I think, was covered by grants, and we're still working on developing ways for participation by customers in the program. And then the rates, one of the other assumptions was that the city would have rates high enough to cover the cost of the initial construction, and then revenue and savings from the program would then pay for the bonds that would cover the construction. And rates, for a number of different reasons, rates were not raised enough to do that. And as you're aware, we're going through a lot of issues with rates in Oxnard, and this is one of the issues we're working on. And then again, of course, we didn't do the seawater barrier, but the ag we have an agreement, which I'll talk about in a minute. We also have the in lieu of Potable in the city, and that's expanding, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other thing that was a big driver for the economics was being able to pump water instead of importing. So that was trading allocations for water that was sold to agriculture pumpers, who would then, instead of pumping, would transfer allocations to the city. We would pump closer to the forebay in areas that would be easier to recharge. So again, because of the drought emergency ordinance, that's something we haven't been able to take advantage of, but hopefully, in the near future, groundwater conditions will improve, and we'll be able to start seeing some savings in the program from that. And then the key benefits were reliability, again, less dependent on imported water, and quality in terms of lowering the TDS, and then rate stabilization. So water that would then be less expensive than imported water in the future. And we're right about the cross point right now where the recycled water or the imported water is becoming more expensive than recycled water. So we're kind of crossing that point right now with the rates. So just quickly, I want to talk about the different pipelines that are in place. So if you look at the purple pipelines on Hueneme Road, there's an existing pipeline that goes to Olds Road, which is the sphere of influence of the city. We have a pipeline on Hueneme Road that's designed, will be going to council for approving plans and specs next month, that goes actually all the way out to here to the Pleasant Valley system. That should hopefully be constructed in about 18 to 24 months. In the meantime, we're using the SMP pipeline from Cayugas to temporarily carry water out to Pleasant Valley. The other pipeline that's in place right now is this purple line going up J Street, then up Ventura Road over to our 2 golf courses here, and then also up to the River Park development there. So we're currently working with United on, they're doing a study to look at a couple different alternatives for connecting to the pipelines. One alternative is up Nauman Road, which would connect to the PTP system. Another alternative is north of River Park, connecting to the PTP up here off of, I think it's Central and Vineyard there. And then also another line continuing up to one of the recharge basins that can be used for recharging the aquifer. So that's something that we're working with them on right now. So in terms of the in-city use, as I mentioned, there was never enough in-city use to just have in lieu of use. There was always the idea that we have other customers or other uses for the water. And this is just a quick summary of that. So there's about 2,000 acre feet of use within the city that's sort of economically viable. Initially, there was over 4,500, I think 4,700 acre feet. But through recycling and other types of conservation, that was reduced by about 2,000. And then there's some other smaller users. I'll go to the next slide really quickly here. And you can see that all of the shaded areas throughout the city, those are potential users under the current DDW requirements that possibly could be connected to recycled water. But you'll notice that some of these small ones are only a few acre feet a year. They could be tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to connect them. So the large customers, of course, the golf course is number one at over 850 acre feet a year. River Park, I think, was what did I say here, about 180, so almost 200 acre feet a year. And then there's some industrial customers, about 600 acre feet a year, that could be used in the city. So the second use for the recycled water is for agriculture use. And we have an existing agreement. In 2015, Pleasant Valley, Howling, Ryder, and Southend signed on to the agreement. And then about a year and a half later, United signed on to the agreement. The agreement's a standard format so that other users can come on. And we actually have interest lately in other users coming on to the agreement. There's a management plan that was approved, I think, in late 2013 that requires a limit on the allocation. So I think it's 5,200 is the most allocations that can be exchanged for providing water to ag irrigators. And I think there's a limit of 8,000 acre feet a year that could be pumped through the program. And there's also a monitoring requirement. So in this agreement, there's 4 priorities. The first priority is the in-city in lieu of use that I just mentioned. The indirect potable reuse, which I'll talk about in a minute, would also then be included up in that category. Then priority 2 would include agriculture irrigation. This is a certain quantity that they've reserved, and that's the first priority. We're going to deliver to them until they use that amount before we deliver to other uses. And we haven't really worked that out yet, but the United could fall into priority 2, 3, or 4, depending on how it works out. And then the third priority is agriculture use. Water's available when all of the other sources are not using it, then that water is available. And you'll see in a minute the price is a little bit lower for that. And then the fourth priority is for Pleasant Valley and United. And then again, that's as available, and it actually is a little bit lower price. And I'll go to the next slide. You can see the prices. So you can see the priorities here. First priority in city. The only rate is without a groundwater exchange. That's a rate set in the rate ordinance. We're updating the ordinance, so that rate's going to change. And the percentage, right now it's set at 85% of potable water. That percentage is going down, so I don't know exactly. The price will probably be about the same, but the percentage of potable water is going to drop from about 85 to possibly around 70%. And then the tier 2, 3, and 4 rate, that's basically indexed off of Cayuga's tier 2 rates. And then for the price for water in exchange for a pumping allocation, tier 1, that's not applicable, that's within the city. Tier 2 is right now about $7.15, tier 3, $5.53, and the tier 4 is $4.07. And one of the reasons for the lower price is because they're managing customers within the Pleasant Valley and the United areas, and they also have storage in their areas. So the next thing I want to talk about was our indirect potable reuse system. So we're drilling the first well. It's just about done. It'll be done in about a month. But just to briefly describe the system. So typically in a recharge system, you'll either inject or you could also surface recharge in one location. You put the water in the ground, and then the water travels down gradient, and then you have another system that then pulls the water out of the ground. In this system, we're using 3 sets of wells, and we're injecting in one well, and then we're leaving the water in the ground for the required response time while we're injecting into a second well, and then we would extract that water while we're injecting into a third well. So I think it's the first time. This is pretty common in other states. I think Florida has quite a few of these in some other states, but I think this is the first system in California that's going to use this system for indirect potable reuse. So as I mentioned, the first well should be finished in about a month or so. It's located near downtown, actually right at the beginning of the runway at the airport in an old Oxnard High School site there. So once the well is complete, we need to do 2 tests. One test will be 1,000 gallons a minute for a month. And then following that, we have a test that will be 3 months of injection, 3 months of holding, and 3 months of extraction. And just a quick aside, the minimum response time right now is 2 months, but you have to meet these 3 different criteria for removal, and we don't meet the virus removal requirements, so we add a month to the response time. But we're working on some modifications to the process so that potentially that could change. Then we'd only have to hold the water in the ground 2 months before it could be extracted and used for potable use. So then the other thing that I mentioned earlier was, because it looks like it could be a couple of decades before we have significantly more wastewater, just because of changes, kind of permanent changes, especially in landscape irrigation because of the drought. We're looking at trying to use stormwater for more recycled water. One of the things that's changing is, cities are getting more dense. That's one of the ideas of future planning, is have the cities more dense, build more downtown. We just updated our downtown revitalization plan, and we have developers coming in wanting to develop, basically lot line to lot line downtown. So in doing that, it's very difficult to meet the stormwater requirements. So we're working with developers now to find ways to capture that stormwater, and then during the peak flows, and then after the peak flows, then treat that through the wastewater plant as well as the recycled water plant to be able to generate more recycled water. So that's something that we'll be looking at over the next year or so. We did an initial study, and it looks like that we can put any kind of stormwater within reason directly into the recycled water plant. But for areas that aren't close to the recycled water plant, it's really not cost effective to build a separate collection system. So right now we're looking at the feasibility, both economics and technical wise, if we could just use existing stormwater system. So it's a little bit of a change in the direction in the past of trying to separate stormwater from wastewater, but be able to fully utilize the existing infrastructure during night or off-peak times. There's plenty of capacity in the wastewater system. The only drawback is then we'd have to treat it twice. You treat it in wastewater and recycled water. So anyway, that's something that we're working on right now. So then just in summary, our next steps, we're working on updating our business plan for the recycled water system. Again, there's been significant changes over the past 4 years. So we're going back looking at both our capital improvement plan as well as our business model. We're going to develop a model that could be used to treat our water system similar to our wastewater system. So it's a regional system where customers actually buy in and have kind of ownership of the wastewater system. So we're looking to ways where our potable and recycled water system could both be treated in that same way. So at the same time, we'll be updating the rates and fees. I mentioned our in-city rates are being updated right now. We're also looking at then the recycled water rate, especially that recycled water rate for recycled water use without a exchange of pumping allocations. Again, that's tied to Cayugas. I think, as I mentioned, one of the key economic drivers of this program was to detach from the Cayugas, increases in the future. And as I mentioned, we're at the point where those two curves are diverging. So I think it's appropriate to go back and look at a cost-based price for that instead of just an index price off of an alternative supply. The other thing we're looking at is how to balance the supply. So I mentioned, there's in-city, there's the indirect reuse, and then maybe a recharge. So what's the best balance of those? So for example, we might use ASR in the wintertime when there's stormwater available for recharge, but then in the summer use recycled water for recharge so that we're able to use the facilities year-round. One of the things I didn't mention on the map was that the pipeline going north towards River Park, would feed both the ASR, the golf course, River Park, and United Recharge. So there isn't enough capacity in that line to provide all of those customers at the same time. So again, as I said, one option might be to alternate seasonally between ASR and between surface recharge. Another option is to build another pipeline, which is in our long-term master plan, and then that could provide the full capacity of the plant year-round to any of the customers or the uses. So the next steps, again, I mentioned rates in place for the city, which includes the first year and a half would include basically no CIP for recycled water. Hopefully, the years following that would include some. But however, fortunately, we do have a significant amount of developer fees that were collected specifically for water supply expansion, so specifically for the GREAT program. So we're planning on moving forward with the pipeline construction in at least the first phase of the ASR program using the existing funding that we have available. And then, of course, we'd be looking for grants and customer participation to expand some of the other programs, the stormwater and the AWPF and the indirect potable reuse expansion. So that concludes the presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions from the board?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for showing up and presenting this to us. It's good to be able to get an update on it as to where you are and how's it progressing. My question is, currently, or in one of the earlier slides, you mentioned that your phase one capacity is about 7,000 acre feet a year. My question is, what capacity is the plant currently running at? Have you been running at 7,000 acre feet a year, or are you at something less?
Yeah, so over the past, we really started last summer with Pleasant Valley, and so it varies. We've had times where we've been running full capacity, and then of course in the winter we haven't been. We're looking this summer though at running full capacity, and then hopefully by the winter we'll start the testing on the ASR well, and I don't know that we'd be able to start doing surface recharge this year, but we're hoping by the following year to be running 100% year-round. So January 2019. 100% year-round, and then really looking for expanding the plant and expanding, looking for new sources of feedstock.
If I remember correctly, somewhere in about the latter half of 2015, the SMP became available for you to start moving water backwards towards Pleasant Valley County Water District. Approximately how much have you been able to deliver to them via that method?
I don't know off the top of my head, so I get too many numbers running through my head right now. But we can get back to you with that. We just did a report on it. I just don't remember the exact numbers yet. Okay. Sorry.
You also mentioned that one of the alternatives has been for United Water to be able to take that water up to the spreading ponds up there. Mm-hmm. And as you know, United has been doing some modeling for that. Negotiations or discussions on that, have they been are they progressing nicely? Is it moving it forward? Is that a viable option? Do you see that as something that you would be comfortable presenting to your own city council here in the short term, or is this something that's long range and far off?
No, well, in terms of the city, I think we're already in place. There's an agreement in place. United could take water immediately through the Pleasant Valley system. So I just maybe quickly go back to that slide, and well, maybe it's not as quick as I thought, but yeah, this slide. So as you said, we're taking water through the SMP line temporarily into the Pleasant Valley system. So there is a possibility of passing water back through this system. I think there's some hydraulic limitations possibly, but water is available at this point right now. It's just a matter of how long it takes to build that pipeline. So I think at this point, United is working on the permits to be able, the DDW permits to be able to use the water. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but I imagine within the next 6 months they would have those permits, because they've been very quick to turn around permits for recycled water during the drought. We had, record-breaking times for a couple of months to turn around something would have been a year. So I think the permitting, I don't want to speak for United. I don't know if there's someone here from United who could speak to that, but my understanding is they're pretty close. And then it would just come down to being able to build the pipeline. And I don't know, I would imagine that's not something that can happen really quickly. Probably 12 to 18 months is even an expedited time frame for a complete pipeline, especially the option 2 is crossing the highway, so that's something that could not be done very quickly. This option is mostly over unimproved ground, so I think that could happen fairly quickly. Again, I think realistically, a year plus before that could be fully implemented, but we're moving forward as quickly as possible. I mean, you know, the permitting is under the works. There's some preliminary design, so I think we're moving forward as quickly as we can on that. But again, it's a big project, lots of pieces, so it's not something that can be done overnight.
On one of your other slides there, you had 4 sets of priorities in which you've listed there, and if I remember correctly, your in-city uses were your primary one, and your ASR was also listed as a primary under option 1. And then you had the other, there you go, indirect potable reuse. A little bit of background, knowing that ASR wells are very expensive, and the fact that you would actually be treating the water for a second or possibly even third time by using ASR, if the United option became more viable as far as dollars and cents, do you see the possibility of those 2 priorities changing in order so that you have cost avoidance?
Yeah, actually, that's part of the business plan. What we've shown actually is the costs are comparable depending on you know, a lot of assumptions, obviously. But yeah, I think that's why these 2 are kind of in green, different colors. The rest of these are basically built in the agreement. The indirect potable reuse and the recharge, those are new. So yeah, where they end up, I think will depend on what the business plan shows and what the interest is, and kind of what the what the, you know, the engineering report show. I think also it's going to be very dependent on, you know, where we are in the drought cycle. So last couple of years, you know, there's use for water everywhere. If it starts getting back to where, you know, raining and there's other stormwater available, then the uses are going to change. So we really, in designing the system, we really wanted to be able to deliver to all, you know, multiple types of customers. So basically all the customers or all the uses that were within reason, knowing that on any given, you know, any given year, any given day, things may change, and we want to be able to use the water 100% of the time each day. So I think really what we're looking for in the business plan is to say, what's the right capacity right now to build each one of these systems to make full use of the water going on into the future. And then in terms of expanding each one of those uses, we'll see what happens in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.
Probably should have started by introducing Dan. We asked him to come and give his presentation because there's a new context for the consideration of projects. What Dan's showing you and what each recall that we've asked anybody could do a project to come and throw their projects up against the wall so we could start developing a project list that would be prioritized by your board in the event that you chose to implement some replenishment fees. The context that we're working in now is replenishment fees, which is not the context in which these business plans have been developed. They've been developed independently with agencies with their own funding. So a lot of this is likely to change, and that was what this conversation was designed to elicit. We feel at the staff level that it's important to form a projects committee, if you will, that will have all those entities that could do and want to do projects at the table coordinating and throwing things down for your board's consideration later. So this is just sort of step one. And thank you, Dan, for coming and making this presentation and the update. But just as a reminder.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you, Dan. Any questions from the general public? Dan, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item number 4, 5. 4 or 5? Where are we? 4. GSP update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record again, Kim Lope, GMA staff. And this is your monthly update. So the TAG held a follow-up special meeting on April 27th. This was a follow-up workshop on the United model. This focused on the Pleasant Valley portion of the model. And this was an opportunity for the TAG members and Dudek, our GSP consultant and agency staff, to interact on a technical basis with the United modeling team and understand and ask questions about the modeling in that particular area, in the Pleasant Valley area. And again, this was a special TAG meeting, so it was open to the public, and we did have folks from the public there. The United was continuing to work on their model as new data become available. It's fairly mature in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley areas, but it continues to be a work in progress. I did want to make clarification. In the board letter, I stated that was consensus of TAG, DUDIC, and the agency staff that the model is at the point that it can be relied on for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins. Well, that was my takeaway from the meetings that we've had. Terry Farman, a TAG member, did call me and say that I may have overstated that TAG's comfort level, and there's still some things that we're chasing down, and so he wanted me to point that out, and so that is the case. But we're getting pretty close, I believe, and I think overall there's pretty good feel about the work that's been done, even though there are some details that are being chased down. Groundwater elevation maps, the consultant's gone through several iterations of preparing those that have gone through review with the TAG. Started out working with the elevation maps as you've seen them in our annual reports and the way they've typically been prepared, that are grouped into the upper aquifer system and the lower aquifer system. And the reason for that is because most of the wells that we're measuring, they're supply wells, they're pumping wells, and they're screened over multiple aquifers. But the work that United's done in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley, and then also work that Cayugas has done for their modeling effort in the East Los Pasos Valley, has helped to differentiate those wells and identify wells in single aquifers. So we've been able to actually develop those maps the consultant has into individual aquifer zones, and that's been very helpful. It's been time consuming, it's been an iterative process. Those maps are under review right now by the TAG and be discussed at the next TAG meeting. Extraction data and sustainability indicators and basin management, though, in the GSPs will still have to focus on the upper and lower aquifer systems, but it will be important to be able to look at the water levels in the individual aquifers. So the distributed watershed parameter model and water budgets, that's the work that DUDIC subconsultant Daniel B. Stevens and Associates was working on. When that work was originally undertaken, your board approved that change order. It wasn't known that the United model was going to be coming available. We didn't know when that was going to happen. United didn't know at that time when they would be releasing it. So during that process of doing that work, the United model did become available. And so at the TAG, there was a lot of opportunity to start comparing the inputs and the results of those. And just to refresh your memory, that the distributed watershed parameter model, what that looks like is the precipitation and irrigation return flows, really what's coming in from surface water and is precipitating and infiltrating down, recharging the aquifers. And so that's been sort of an iterative process to try and look at both of those models and see where they differ, why they differ, and try and understand why that is and build some convergence on that. I think the effort has helped to improve both efforts by looking at the two of them. But again, it's been an iterative process that has taken some time and was not envisioned at all in the original scope and schedule. The TAG has formed an ad hoc subcommittee to continue to look at the Daniel B. Stevens effort in that modeling, and so there was a data request to Stevens for additional information and response back. They felt that that was going to be significant additional work, so we're going to look at that in some more detail at the next TAG meeting, and then we'll know how we're going to move forward with that. But the water budgets are a critical path item for the GSPs to move forward with really developing the sustainable yield and the sustainable indicators and all the rest of the sustainability stuff. So it's important that that they're to be developed well, and again, it's can't move forward with some of this other stuff till we get this done.
Mr. Chair. Just have a question. So when you say it's pushed out the GSP development, do you have an estimate in terms of the time, how much it's pushed out the GSP development?
Yes, Director Bennett will, I have a later slide, and I'll talk about our current look at what the schedule looks like, incorporating that, but it's a couple months at this point.
And we didn't know we were going to get the United model, but we got the United model, so it's great because now we have more information. Can you give us a rough estimate in terms of like how far apart were the two models, or what's the degree of difference, or what's the gain? You know, how much gain is there? Because I know we can always say we could be even better with more information, and I just want to make sure that we're cautious that we don't say always. Well, we can always wait again a few more months, and we'll even have more information and more information. So, you know, significant gain, and are we now at the point where we have a good level of confidence that between these two, we've got the data that we need to be able to move forward?
Well, I believe, and the consultant believes, that we are very close to having that and ready to move on. We'll be discussing this at the TAG meeting next Thursday to see where they feel. I know that the ad hoc subcommittee they formed still had a fair amount of questions about the Daniel B. Stevens and Associates work and how that fit in. But one of the things we want to look at is what is the magnitude of those differences and how will it affect it overall. And obviously we want to get to a certain point at where the differences start to become insignificant and move on. And we should be getting close to that, but again, I think, again, the consultant feels they have the data to move on, but there is still a concern at the TAG level that we need to flesh out next Thursday.
But at least staff thinks that the magnitude of the differences is not so great that we can't get moving on here soon.
There's a few pieces of information that we're looking for from Stevens to really put that to bed that we don't have yet to make that direct comparison. So I think once we have that, then we will be able to make that decision.
Great, thank you.
But I think we're very close.
So along those lines, though, Kim, if possible, at the next meeting, the next time there's an update, I would like to get a direct update from TAG and from DUDEC with respect to their status, the challenges they've got, the data they have or don't have, their ability to meet the timeline, whether there are revisions needed to their scopes and revisions needed to their budgets. I've seen correspondence of late from Stevens requesting a budget change and an increase to their scope of work because of information they claim they need to do that isn't in their budget, some of which I think TAG may disagree with. I want to hear from them. I want to hear them come in here and tell us, each of them, the scope's adequate, the budget's adequate, what time do they need to do the work that they need to do, what is yet undone, and how do they intend to accomplish that? I appreciate everything that you bring. I want to hear it from them because I want to question them about what they are and aren't doing. It's in the budget. The DUDEC's contract, they stood where you're standing now, and before we approved it, I insisted that that contract required them to be at every one of these meetings, and they said they'd be here, and I haven't seen them since. I think they need to be here in June. One of the things I would like to have on that June agenda is considering revisions to the contract, because if they can't answer the questions, one of the revisions might have to do with the termination of their contract, and you can deliver that message from me if you would.
Okay, Chair West, I will do that, and we had intended to talk about some revisions to the contract. In their existing scope of work, they have one board meeting left, and one of the things that we did want to bring to your board, and I was going to get to that under the schedule, was some additional meetings for them to attend, both TAG and board meetings, and also to consider an additional public workshop that they would put on that were in addition to the scope that was in the budget.
That's a good idea, but the scope I was referring to was more technical, but that's fine.
Right. And so one of the places, and I know you've made that request, and since we have that one meeting left and we wanted to see where we landed with the water budget because this is such a key piece, I was hoping that we would get there. I'm still hopeful we'll get there, so to bring them for the next meeting, so they can present that as well, that key piece of the whole groundwater sustainability plan effort.
Director West, I'm certainly fine with your request. I just want to make sure it's not in lieu of us still getting staff's professional recommendation in terms of where to go. Yeah, I just want to make sure that was clear. Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. Very good. So moving forward, groundwater-dependent ecosystems is an indicator of groundwater, surface water interaction and interdependency, which is something that needs to be looked at as one of the sustainability indicators within SGMA. And the TAG ad hoc subcommittee has been working with the Nature Conservancy, who's been putting together a statewide guidance document on how to implement this. And the Las Posas Valley has been a test case where they've been working on that with the TAG. And one of the concerns that's come out of that, especially here in the GMA area, is the dry season flows in our waterways is essentially wastewater treatment plant treated effluent, and that's been maintaining ecosystems. As wastewater treatment plant operators look to take that effluent to the highest and best use, we anticipate those flows may decrease. What we're concerned about, and the TAG ad hoc subcommittee and the Nature Conservancy recognizes this as well, that we don't want the GSAs, such as Fox Canyon, to then be looked at to supply groundwater, to supply ecosystems that had been supplied by wastewater treatment, to use that groundwater at the cost of other beneficial uses. So Nature Conservancy has set up a meeting with the ad hoc subcommittee and as well as staff in Sacramento on June 8th with senior DWR and state board staff in order to explain this situation and make sure that they understand the state level that we don't get these things mixed up and try to fix problems that are beyond the jurisdiction and control of the GSAs by misunderstanding indicators. So that's an important meeting, an important piece of work, I think, that will move forward. And so we'll report back as to how that meeting went and whether the state folks seem like they're getting that. So the schedule, we talked about the schedule, we talked about the fact the United model came available and that we've been going through this iterative approach of re-looking at it. The consultants had to redo some work. As new data became available, as they were producing it, and then new modeling information would come available, and then the comparison of the Daniel B. Stevens and the United model work. And that's pushed things out. And so the revised schedule, which you have in your packet, you have a revised Gantt chart. It looks like that. That's the first page. And it does look better printed out on a 11 by 17, which I think the board has and is available on the website for public. And it shows that we're pushed out now for the draft to be coming to the board for consideration of adoption in November of 2017. Previously, we were looking at 17. The TAG has taken a review of this. They had a short period to review it before the meeting, and then we reviewed the meeting. TAG pointed out concerns that there are some concurrent reviews that all sort of come up in short periods in the summer. It's important to recognize that per your board's direction, or at least past direction, the schedule does not have contingency built into it. It's a very closely, it's a tight schedule. And in revising the schedule, what the consultant did is they basically trued up to where we are as of now. And that considers getting the water budget finished up and completed and moving on. And so there wasn't any adjustment to the duration of future tasks. Are the same as what we've had. And so barring contingencies, that is where we're at with the schedule. I would like to point out there are these continuing risks of schedule. We talked about these at the January meeting when we looked at the schedule revision last. There's a number of documents that DWR has not put out yet, including water year types for basins and future supply variability, which is basically the climate change model. We think we can move forward without those, but if there's something significant that comes up out of that effort, then it is a potential risk. We will say that I think United's modeling has certainly confirmed, and most of us feel that the challenges to the ability to divert water off the Santa Clara River is a much larger threat and to water management here than climate change scenarios, and so, but they have to be built into the GSP effort. Another concern is the United model is available, as we've talked about before, for Oxnard and Pleasant Valley, but it's going to be another 6 months before they estimate, before they're ready to release the work that's been done or is being done in the West Los Posos Basin. And Callegas is also doing a modeling effort in the East Los Posos Basin. It's on a similar schedule, and their consultants are working together to tie those together. But the schedule presumes that assumes that we're moving ahead on the original assumptions of using the best available science, which is what Sigma calls for, and we need to not get caught into the same kind of issue that we did with the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley of asking the consultant to go back and re-look at information after they've completed it as new modeling information comes out. So we want to point that out, that to move forward with the schedule, we need to move forward with if this is what your board desires, with the currently available information.
But there's a distinction, is there not, between the best available science and the best available information if the best available information isn't based upon the best available science?
Well, I think there's two ways to approach it in two schools. Sigma wants you to use what the best available science is. There are a lot of reasons why it's important to move forward quickly with the GSPs, not the least of which is the ability to have a funding mechanism for developing projects and starting to lay in that funding, because that's going to be a key piece to not only making up water that may not be coming in the future, but also to softening the reductions that will ultimately be needed. We can't do that until we have an adopted GSP. It also allows us to be in a better position to go after Prop 1 funding. It allows us to be in front of the DWR process and kind of set the bar for what's being done rather than preconceived thresholds at the DWR. So there's a lot of reasons why. Now, Sigma also recognizes that there's adaptive management and review on a 5-year more often basis.
There's a difference between adaptive management and creating a poor plan that needs to be fixed later. I keep hearing, and it annoys the hell out of me, I keep hearing the term for adaptive management as an excuse for a bad plan. And I agree that we need to use the best available science. If it means we need to use some time to develop better information based upon the best available science, that's what we need to do. But I don't think we should be satisfied with inadequate or incomplete information just because it's available when we have the means and the opportunity to develop more reliable information, not in the long term, but in the relatively short term. That was my only point.
Well, so I'd like to weigh in a little bit. Nobody's using pseudoscience here. All of it is, as you state, best available science. There will always be, by definition, more and better information available. So it's a matter of art trying to figure out the point at which you cut it. And there's always the temptation to take it a little bit further. We're giving our best available recommendations based on our experience. And it's making people uncomfortable and causing lots of conversations like the one we're having now.
Dr. West?
Yes.
Yeah, if I could, this is a reoccurring theme that comes up at our meetings. You know, if it is characterized as, well, we don't want a bad plan that needs to be fixed, nobody wants a bad plan that needs to be fixed, and as was mentioned, it's a question of art. This is, to say this, that would imply somebody's using pseudoscience, or if they're using the best available, but there's always the potential for more, there will always be the potential for more. What I want to emphasize, you want to emphasize, boy, we can't create a bad plan here. I want to emphasize, we are in overdraft. We have been in overdraft for a long period of time. There is a lot of pain that's going to come, and it is understandable that people want to avoid that. But every day we stay in overdraft, the public is a little bit worse off. And if we stay in overdraft for an extra year, the public is worse off in that situation. So we have a responsibility to square that circle. And I think that given how long we have put this off, if there is constant drumbeat every meeting, every time we do something, that we need more time, you have to be careful that that's not just people that have incentives to slow this down. And you have to be careful. You will always have somebody be able to make that argument. So I just want to speak up that there should, as the policymakers who are charged with trying to stop overdraft and protect us from saltwater intrusion and all those things, we should have a sense of urgency to at least get the first steps done and acknowledge the first steps won't be perfect, but if we waited for perfect, we would never be there, which is the exact opposite of you saying a bad plan. I'm saying the demand for a perfect plan is also an unreasonable thing, and it feels like we've got people making reasonably solid decisions. But we will always have there's no question we're going to have this outcry. Whatever day we decide to adopt a plan, there will be people saying we need more time. It has never happened in my time here on Fox Canyon that hasn't been the case. So I want to get that out there to sort of counter what you're saying. Thank you.
I'd like to pitch in on this one. I think, for me, it's a threshold question. Right now, we have data gaps. And on those data gaps, we're going to be unable to, in order to take a position, as far as I'm concerned, that is not ripe for challenge. Right now, the critical path for me and what I'm seeing on this and how I see it being pushed has to do with the water budget and what is sustainable yield for each one of the basins. You're going to be asking us in order to take a look at undesirable results. Again, I'm beating on this that we haven't had the opportunity in order to see those and discuss those as policy statements within this organization. So therefore, anything coming forward to me, I can't even consider adopting at this time until we have those discussions in order to understand what they are, because they have a direct impact as to what the target is that we're pushing towards. So yes, I'm saying that we need to probably extend this out. Yes, I'm saying that we need to take more time, but it is a threshold issue that I don't plan on deferring forever. Second of all, with regards to simply pushing forward and trying to get a plan done, that's what we did with Emergency Ordinance E. And that was a bad plan that was horribly instituted, that's been an utter failure. Other than that, it's fine. But that's what happens when we get rushing too fast. We put together a plan and we impact people where it does not accomplish what it was tasked to do. And so on this one, I am more interested in getting it right than getting it fast.
Thank you.
Well, that concluded my report.
That's an anticlimax. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I would just chime in, and my opinions, I think, are well known by my fellow directors, but I think what we do here in this initial plan, that foundation is important. And the concept of adaptive management, just the terminology has always concerned me, because typically in governmental bodies, when we institute ordinances or plans, they become pretty much the permanent thing that everything is worked off from that point. So I think the starting point is important. And from a water user point of view, that sustainable yield number, that we need to get as close to right as we can on that, because that makes real effects on the economy of our entire county. So, yes, a few more months of extension to get this thing right is, I would wholly support that.
I certainly am not opposed to a few more months, but the request will end up being much more than a few more months before we're done. And I think what we just have seen in this conversation is literally the philosophical change that's taken place in this board as a result of the change of the makeup of this board. I think that you had Director Mulhart saying if he had to wrestle between those two things, say if this number is good enough, we ought to get started with it, rather than saying I want to get that number as close to perfect as possible. That always is a few months down the road, always. So if it's only a few more months, I have no problem with a few more months. But it won't be only a few more months. It won't be going from September to November when we're done with this conversation. And that's because, and it will reflect the philosophical change of the sport. So if you ask, is there any other comment, we ought to just be out there in front on that based on what I'm hearing here this morning.
Well, that is an appropriate opinion, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is we have the economy of the county relying on what we do here. And the assertion that somehow people are delaying, we have a tag group who has volunteered their time and spends countless hours trying to get this right. We've all put people on that group that we thought had integrity and were robust in their knowledge. So I don't think there's this concerted effort of delaying for the sake of delaying. I think it's about getting it right, and I support that.
Well, and we have the well-being of this county also on the line, not just the economy, of the well-being, and we've had it for 30 years, and we haven't gotten there. We've had the well-being on the line for 30 years, and we are not there, and we are still. Do we have an appropriate sense of urgency given that we've had 30 years to get here? That's the difference in opinion that we have, and I respect the difference in opinion. And people who are going to suffer consequences, they will be uncomfortable no matter whatever time, however, if we take whatever much amount of time, they will still be uncomfortable at that point in time. We have to recognize that and be ready to deal with it. I'm not sure we are. Thank you.
Just a matter of art and some messaging that needs to get out there is that, so let's say there's a delta between what Dudek's model says and what a high number for the LPUG might be. Well, your board has the authority to say, well, let's use the higher number until we get the study in, right? And what that does is it puts a GSP in place that allows you to do replenishment fees. We are months and years out from a project. There's a ramp down that's required by Sigma. You guys get to decide where we start the ramp down. It's not necessarily that model. So you guys have tools available to you that would allow you to adopt a GSP and still protect the interests that you're trying to protect, and then have any new information, modify that model in short order later. I mean, the ramp down is to 2040. What we're trying to get to is a place where you guys get the supply side toolbox added to your kit. So you have more than just cuts to work with. So that's a big part of the reason for the push to get something adopted. It's not to put anybody in a box and give them not less than they had. It's to get started on making it work. So just those are tools that you'll have available to you as we go through the hearings on this.
And I appreciate you saying that, Director Pratt, because I feel strongly in that way too. And I think actually the truth is somewhere in the middle between my assertions and Director Bennett's. I think essentially there is urgency. We do need to get it done, but we do need to get it done in the right way. And in the past few years of pursuing this thing, we've had a blinders on pursuing a schedule instead of trying to do it right. And that's been my problem with it.
If I may, you might be surprised, but I agree with what Director Bennett said. My concerns, however, aren't purely academic. I've heard some comments coming back from Dudek that are similar to what we heard from the hydrometrics a year ago, whenever it was, about reaching the tail end of the scope and suddenly, running out of money and running out of time. That's kind of the reason why I want them here. I want to hear what they've got to say about the work yet to be done and their path to get it done. It wasn't simply just to put the brakes on, it's more just to make sure that everybody's got the tools they need and the time they need to do the job they need to do. That's all. With that, any other questions from the board?
You started it, so it's good that you ended.
Thank you. Any questions from the general public? By all means, questions, comments, come forward.
Thank you, Chair West. My name's Peter Goldenring, and I represent the Las Posas Basin Water Rights Coalition. I will tell you that it is a substantial number of folks in the Las Posas Basin that includes agriculture and industrial. The group wants to make very clear to you that we support the concept that's being expressed by Directors West, Anaranio, and Borchard. And that is fundamentally the data has to be identified, and then good decision-making can be had. So, for example, in the Las Posas Basin, while you, Director Bennett, keep talking about overdraft, the hydrological data seems to indicate that in terms of a measurement under sigma, it's not in material overdraft. Now, that doesn't mean that a plan shouldn't be implemented. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be replenishment fees. It doesn't mean that good project planning should be happen. But it's not going off the cliff. And finding the sustainable number for each aquifer, because there are two aquifers in the Las Posas Basin that we need to talk about, Fox Canyon as well as Grimes. And then from that, figuring out what the delta is, if there's a gap, and then figuring out what the plan is, what good policy is about. And putting the cart before the horse in terms of good data, I think is not good policy, and in lawyer land, it would be arbitrary and capricious. So it would be ill-advised. So I would urge the board to work with your staff and your consultants to get the data as soon as possible, get it out, get it vetted, so everybody knows what it is. The basins are all different. It's not a county-wide issue. It's a basin issue. And so to some extent they communicate, and to some extent they don't. And then you will have under Sigma the toolbox. You have 5 years under Sigma. Nobody in this room is suggesting you take 5 years to do it, but you will have a toolbox at that point with the delta, and then the stakeholders can have a conversation, for example, in Las Posas, and say, okay, the delta of what's being pumped and what sustainable yield is X, and here are the options, and here's what we want this plan to look like, and it's going to include push down on pumping, and it's going to include replenishment fees, and it's going to include projects, and it's going to include state water, and here's how it fits together so that we, the people in this room in that basin, then can do what they want to do, which is keep their land viable, keep their property viable, keep the farming going, and everything else that is so important to them. So nobody, at least in my group, is fighting the concept of putting a plan together. But we very much appreciate the comments about let's get good data. It doesn't need to be perfect. Nobody's asking for perfect. But let's get good data, because the indications right now are indicating that the Las Posas Basin is not in overdraft. And with that being said, my clients will still support a plan, including replenishment fees, including pumping limitations, to preserve and maintain that basin and make it even more healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Moving on to agenda item number 5, pumping allocation systems development.
Mr. Chair, board members, this is a pretty brief update, just reminding you of what occurred last at last month's board meeting and where we're moving forward to now to help work through this process. Then under the Las Posas Valley Basin allocation system, the LPEG folks have continued to meet weekly in these open meetings. You did hear from Jane Waters at the start of the meeting that apparently they are still working through some issues to get people on board with all the various issues. One of the things that's happened with the Las Posas users group is they've have a lot of new people. They've been working on this for a very long time. They have a lot of people coming in that are hearing that it's happening and getting involved. And so in order to get people up to speed fairly quickly, they're going to be having a groundwater 101, if you will, tomorrow afternoon ahead of their normal allocation meeting. They've asked me to come and talk about the GMA and give an overview of Sigma and GSP, similar to what we did at the Las Posas Town Hall meeting. So we'll do that to get people onto the same starting place so they can continue to talk about the allocation. Your board set a special board workshop on June 23rd last month at 1:30. And so that's when we plan to come in and brief your board on all the details of what the LPUG effort has been to develop that proposed allocation system. And of course, it'll give an opportunity for stakeholders to express to you their concerns they might have and any comments that they want you to hear in terms of moving forward with further development of that system and ultimate adoption of it. On the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins, we understand that those stakeholder groups are continuing to meet. Last meeting, your board recommended holding a couple executive committee public meeting stakeholder workshops out in the Oxnard in the evening. And so we had originally we communicated that we're going to push one out, and we're going to have the first one on June 15th at the Rio Vista Middle School. And then the second one, we're looking at July 12th at the Oxnard Performing Arts Center. And so we'll be working to get the word out to stakeholders that they'll be able to come and start talking about those issues. And we do plan to hopefully have those folks there as well, and they've committed to, they don't know these, we just set these dates, so we need to make sure they're available to come to those dates and get those folks come and tell us what they've been doing. Staff will update you on what we've been working on in terms of trying to come up with some alternative ideas if they don't come together, and it'll be an open forum for others, for everyone, all stakeholders, to present their thoughts and opinions on the process. So that's the extent of my comments on that at this time.
I have questions.
Question?
As I read through the Gantt chart here, and going back or going down to line number 64, whereabouts the estimated sustainable yield is supposed to be presented to us, it's looking, in this Gantt chart, it was scheduled for the end of June. Based upon what you've said in your prior discussion and what I'm seeing here, that may get pushed 2 months.
Are we back on item 4?
Well, it's a combination of 4 and 5.
Right. Director Aranio?
4 and 5.
So the allocations systems, they're a management action in order to bring the basins into sustainable yield. And the Sigma requires that the plans, the GSPs, have management actions to bring the basins into sustainable yield. Sure. They don't specifically say that you have to have an allocation system. Right. So we your board and the staff, I think everyone believes there needs to be allocation systems. There have been allocation systems historically in the GMA in order to achieve the sustainability that we need to under Sigma. But that process does not have to be completely synced up with the GSP. The GSP can move forward and reference an allocation system that will be implemented, so it does not have to be all tied down. Similarly, your board could decide under your GMA authority to implement an allocation system ahead of the GSP being developed, if you should so choose to do so. So that particular item, I don't think is going to be a significant roadblock to continuing development of the GSPs.
Okay, so I'll take your answer as a yes. The reason why I bring that up is you've got a workshop scheduled for the Las Posas Basin here on June 23rd at 1:30 p.m. Some of the things that I'm hearing from constituents within the Las Posas Basin is a concern about that workshop and the development then that is going to be used from that for an ordinance, and specifically having to do with the proposed allocation plan that is coming forward out of LPUG, may not have been thoroughly vetted as to whether or not it's even necessary. So that's where my question comes into, that if it gets the rest of the LPUG constituents into buying onto the project and buying into the allocation plan, wouldn't you want to have the necessity of the plan or the allocation structure thoroughly vetted and understood before you put it into action?
Well, Director Aranio, the allocation system is how you divide up the available water, the pool of water, or pie, if you will. Mm-hmm. The sustainable yield that's being developed through the GSP process is how much you have, not how you cut it up and how you divide it among the water users. It's how much you have. So the allocation process can continue on. That process has been ongoing for some time. The LPUG's been meeting in open meetings for a number of times. They've come and briefed your board a number of times. Your board directed staff to work with, I think it was a January meeting, directed staff to work with the LPUG group to develop an ordinance language and bring it back for a workshop. We held an evening town hall meeting that we sent out mailings to people in the Las Posas Basin and with the LPUG folks. So there has been a lot of discussion in open meetings, mm-hmm. and so.
So let me answer that question a different way. Ideally, they'd be concurrent, but it'll be up to your board if they're not. That's just the way it'll work. And if if we get there, it's not happening, well, your board has a decision to make.
Thank you. No further questions for me.
Any questions? Comments from the general public?
Good afternoon, Lynn Jensen with Ventura County CoLab. I just want to say that the goals for CoLab really in this process, in the GSP process, is to ensure that there's an economically viable agriculture industry in Ventura County for the future of this community. And this also impacts many ancillary businesses that are related to agriculture. We focus on solution, and given ag's reliance on the weather and the perfect regulatory storm and many unprecedented challenges, there's 100,000 acres of irrigated agriculture in Ventura County that's in jeopardy, and solutions are very difficult. We attend the monthly TAG meetings and have great respect for the technical capability of the TAG members. At every meeting, I seem like I make the same public comment about how important it is to have sound science behind the hydrological data and interpretations, and that's really going to be the foundation of this GSP. This is fundamental to the credibility in the end of the plan that will include regulation of groundwater pumping for all kinds of stakeholders. We have the we have commented each time also that this schedule is aggressive and it's likely unattainable, and that there's lack of adequate stakeholder process throughout the process, particularly toward the end. And as you saw today, it's being revised now to November 2017. At this morning's LPUG meeting, the committee was unable to find a consensus on the allocation plan. And the issues that were voiced, I'm just repeating what I heard today, was that there needed to be a better understanding of the variance process. The review of 1914 super priority water rights needs to be part of the consideration. Need to have the GSP define a sustainable yield in the tag process before the allocation plan is finalized. The minimum allocations that were set at 1.27 and 1.37 acre feet per acre for ag is unrealistic and unsustainable, and they're concerned about this target before the sustainable yield has been calculated. The Las Posas basins are not in overdraft and the process is too fast. We need a cost analysis on the projects to provide new water. How much is it going to cost the ag industry? Can they even bear the costs? Wholesale, this is a wholesale extraction of water rights. And also a comment that there were not accurate minutes describing really the stakeholder input at some of the meetings. But what has occurred to us in thinking about this is that while LPUG is ahead of the Oxnard Pleasant Valley basins with respect to the allocation plan, it is really behind with respect to the 3D modeling effort at United Water. There are new ideas coming out of OPUG on the allocations that were considered by LPUG, but they really don't have enough time to get together to determine how these would work in each basins and perhaps have them have implementation of similar processes so that Fox Canyon GMA would not have to have all these different allocation schemes for different basins in there. So the question is it reasonable to request that these LPUG-OPUG processes be allowed to catch up with each other? Having better aquifer data in the Las Posas Basin by using the United model, which I think has been really critical for the Oxnard Basin, and particularly to determine the underflow to the West Las Posas in the modeling effort. And with the allocation plans to allow more communication between the two groups to come up with more similar systems, as I said. It seems better for the Fox Canyon GMA, and it would replace some placeholders that are going to be put in the LPUG allocation plan. It seems that the LPUG process has evolved quite a bit, even in the last couple of weeks, due to the stakeholder feedback. The allocation committee rushed to respond, recommending changes in management flexibility, base period concerns, and unexercised rights concerns. They were very responsive, and we appreciate their timeliness in that. But we still think that there's inadequate time for the stakeholders to understand all these new things and try to make a decision on the spot this morning. And we are concerned a bit about the June 23rd and August 11th timeframe and what kind of and whether there will be a consensus behind it. As we said, the OPEG and LPUG processes have been proceeding and producing results, but it's critically important to get this right and for the basins and the Fox Canyon GMA to be coordinated. And we think that this will affect the long-term success of the agricultural industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy?
Comments to the board, LPUG member. I couldn't disagree with Lynn more about what happened today at the meeting. I think if you drop somebody into a situation, first time at a GMA meeting or first time at an LPUG meeting or first time dealing with water issues, that things get misconstrued and misinterpreted, and you're 1.8 or this or that or number or OPV, what does that mean? And I think we've made a very concerted effort to bring a very strong working product to this board, and I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair West. Peter Goldenring for the Las Posas Basin Water Rights Coalition. I think my comments are somewhat in between the two that you just heard. The truth of the matter is that what the conversation at the LPUG committee level is, and I've been attending, is we have to get something to GMA, and if we don't, then horrible things are going to happen per the threats that have happened before. And we acknowledge that it is flawed and defective and can be made much better given a little bit of time, especially understanding what the sustainable yield number is. But we're going to rely on the board, if they enact this flawed plan, allocation plan, to make fixes down the road. And at least to my group and to me, that is backwards and is bad policy making. There are any number of issues that may very well be able to be resolved. The LPUG plan has good concepts in it. There are people who have worked very hard on it, and I am not for a second suggesting that the basin, and I view Las Posas Basin to be a discrete issue as opposed to the Oxnard area, for example, or Pleasant Valley. There may very well be an allocation plan, and I would dare say that everybody in this room, including many of my clients, would agree to the concept of an allocation plan. Once we know what the sustainable yield number is, once we know what the delta is, and then everybody can quantify that world, because right now the conversation is it's only going to be an allocation plan, and you're going to end up with a desert in the Las Posas Basin unless somebody chooses to do these other plans, unless somebody quantifies these other plans, unless somebody puts them in a list and makes it happen. And I would remind you that what Sigma says is that you have 5 years to come up with a GSP and use all the tools in your toolbox to address the delta between pumping and sustainable yield. First step is sustainable yield. That doesn't mean that you don't then after that do an allocation plan that backs into replenishment projects to follow. I don't think that's fundamentally flawed. But right now, the folks in LPUG have gotten a message from Mr. Mulhart that if you don't bring us something, we're going to do something awful. And so choose your poison. And so my group would ask that you tie the consideration of an ordinance from LPUG around allocation to let's getting the sustainable yield. That was Director Aranio's question, when is it? I'm hearing October-ish or November. Well, okay, LPUG, assume that's going to be true right around that time after we all get the numbers and they're vetted and they're solid and they're real. Now let's start looking at what this looks like, and it'll give, frankly, more time for this plan to be cleaned up and addressed, because right now, if it comes to you, you're going to hear a whole lot of screaming about inherent structural problems because it's a we got to get it done or the world ends in August. So we'd ask your board to consider, if I can put it this way, relieving that pressure by a couple of months and allowing this process to be a little more rational. I mean, the meetings have been almost weekly, and we're in the weeds of drafting language around ordinance stuff that people in this room are going to live with for their lives and their children's lives. And I have a hard time with, well, it's flawed and we'll rely on the board to fix the problems later. So that's my request.
Just a comment, though, if I may, Peter. Structurally, I think working to fix the structural problems in an allocation plan shouldn't be dependent on what the sustainable yield is. The sustainable yield will be whatever the science tells it is. The plan can be structurally sound and the numbers plugged in later.
Well, the problem is this. Right now, Mr. Bondi, who is Callegas, and I will tell you within the last 48 hours, Callegas has taken the position that Mr. Bondi is a retained expert for their attorney and not allowed to transparently share information among the LPUG group the same way as it previously was going. But Mr. Bondi's number is roughly 1.27. It's a desert in Las Posas Basin. And so the ramp down and the numbers that are being proposed are tying to a number that turns Las Posas Basin into a desert. And that hits, and the plan question starts becoming, is this ramp down 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 15 years? Is it 19 years? What's this ramp down? And so you can put up your placeholder in there, but the reality is that under those kinds of fundamental structure allocation plan conversations need to have. What's the ramp down? How do you figure out what the pain of the ramp down looks like if you don't know what the delta is? Is it a 5-year? If the delta is really little, then it may be that everybody in this room says to you, yeah, we can forget replenishment projects. We can do that in 5 years. It's all good. If the delta is huge and someone says, I think we need to do a ramp down in 5 years, then all of these people's property values crash, their trees get bulldozed, and it's over because you won't have replenishment projects online in 5 years. So without the delta, you can't even approach from a business point of view what a ramp down looks like and how much people are going to bring in imported water quickly or whatever that looks like. We heard today Cayugas wants $1,400+ an acre foot for imported water. Can't run an orchard on that. So, again,
we're being asked to delay things. We're being given information that so-and-so said, and these people are arguing. And I really think we need to keep the June 23rd date and have a discussion. And if people want to talk about it then, we'll talk about it then. We'll talk about nothing else that day. We may not get to where we had thought we were going to get that day, but we will at least be hearing more of than one person coming and talking to each of us and then trying to relay it and a few people coming and talking. I'd like to hear more about the entire issue, and I think June 23rd, I believe it is the best day to do it. That's the date we'd reserved to do it.
Jeff, did you have a question?
It was on messaging, sir. Just that, I do know your board said get it done by September, or we'll need to do it for you in the presumption where it will be worse, but that's just a presumption. It was that we would do something instead, is what I heard your board say, or in lieu of. And the second thing is, I heard Mr. Goldenring say, just give us a couple months. Well, today that happened. It's a November date, not a September date. So just by way of messaging to those who are worried about the big falling off the cliff. I've never heard your board say that.
Good afternoon. My name is Walt Wendelstein. I'm here from Cohen and Burge. We're the general counsel for Cayugas Municipal Water District. I just wanted to address one aspect of Mr. Goldenring's comments, the prior commenter. With respect to the sharing of information, there is no issue with respect to Cayugas concerning the sharing of information. What has occurred over the past, I would say, 48 to 72 hours are requests from Mr. Goldenring, who is a counsel representing, who is an attorney representing his coalition, a coalition and Mr. Goldenring who have threatened litigation. Therefore, the requests for documents, according to Cayugas policy, fall within being processed through Public Records Act requests. We have no concern or no issue or no intention to refuse to produce appropriate information under the Public Records Act as required by the Government Code. I just wanted to clarify that issue with respect to the last comments. Thank you.
We've gone far afield from the
Item at hand.
That's right. Any other questions or comments? We'll move on to
Yes.
item number. Sorry.
Yes, I would like to get these comments said. Number one, because LPUG is not in overdraft, does not mean we don't have a significant overdraft problem here that Fox Canyon has to deal with, and that Fox Canyon's been assigned to deal with all the way back 30 years ago with saltwater intrusion and everything else. And now we're hearing this, but that's consistent because every time any resource needs to be regulated, the extractors, there's this common pattern. The extractors fight every step of the regulation, and the most common fight is to ask for delay at every step. And then when you get some responsible extractors that come together and say, okay, we recognize this and we're going to do something, you always will have a new set of extractors that will show up and say, well, this is our first meeting. What do you mean? You can't be making all these decisions this fast. if they become responsible and they step up to the plate, there will be another group that will come up at the last minute and say, this is the first I'm hearing about this, right? This is not, none of this should surprise anybody here. That's just how it happens with every resource when you do it. So the fundamental question I have is, the contention that Mr. Bondi's number is so far off that we can't even have a concurrent process saying, okay, how are we going to do this? We might have to tweak it some, but how are we going to basically do it? Are we going to, it'd be a little bit like having a question. You got a pie, is it going to be first come, first serve, whoever's got the biggest spoon? Or are we going to do it a little more rationally than that? That's a reasonable conversation you can have when you know you're going to have to divide a pie up, and you don't have to know exactly how big the pie is. It does make a difference whether the pie is as big as this room or the pie is as big as my hand. But if we're talking about being that far off, then the science ought to be very obvious that there's something major wrong. We've been after this, folks, for a long time. Anybody that's wanted to question major delta differences has been able to do that. But I recognize that now when you bring attorneys into the process, et cetera, you get a whole new level of ability to delay, an ability to frustrate the good faith compromises that have been made by the responsible extractors. And somebody's got to stand up and try to defend them. And that really should be this board because, and that's the final thing I would say, because this idea of you better do it or we're going, we have to do it. By law, we have to do it. And, you're going to hear Mr. Goldring keep saying, you got 5 years to do this, right? We're different from other GSPs. We have been in existence for a lot longer. We didn't start from scratch like they're starting, or they're still trying to figure out what their governing board is, right? We should be able to be far more responsible given the data of information that we had, et cetera, as we go forward. And if we don't defend those people and actually reinforce them for trying to stay on our schedule, making a good faith effort to stay on our schedule, we won't be responsible policymakers that are actually matching our responsible extractors out there that I feel have made a good faith effort. And thank you for letting me get that said. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Moving on then to agenda item number 5, an update on the water market AMI pilot program.
Good afternoon, Chair West, Board.
Number
Item
6. Number 6, you're right. I'm off by one all day, I know. Just one, that's okay. I got here.
Arnie Anselm, staff to the GMA, for your monthly brief update on the water market and automated metering infrastructure pilot. I don't have a presentation today. It's going to be just a brief update. I'm not going to go over the history. I've done that in all the other presentations so far. So where we are today, we've got 15 wells in various stages in the application process. Some need to cure some compliance issues. Some are getting their AMI installed right now, and we're getting the data gathered up so that they will know the water available for trade. So far, AMI has been installed on 4 COM-codes, 5 wells totals to date. And the new news is our data portal is active. They've got that up and running. It's not been populated with the data yet from all the wells, so that we don't have the ability to do a demonstration of the data portal for this area. It will provide the year-to-date pumping, the water available for trade, and it will be the interface for the water market participants to offer water for trade and to make bids on water for trade. We do plan to add some features, so the data portal will export the monthly totals of market allocations and the water traded, and also we hope to get it to flag any malfunctions in the meters and to let also flag if somebody in the water market is getting close to their allocation for trading, so that they know that they either need to buy some water or stop pumping. We don't have the next ad hoc committee for the water market AMI pilot study scheduled yet. We're hoping to get the the data portal up and running so we can have a live demonstration, and we also would like to have a demonstration of the pricing algorithm so we can see how these trades are actually going to be priced and made. And also finally hope to have training on the data portal and how the water market will work in early June. We're just trying to get a date where everybody's available. So with that, I'll happy to answer any questions.
Arnie, it seems like, based on our prior discussions, the installation, the AMI installations are going slower than anticipated. Is my perception correct, or has that been your experience?
What Ranch System told us is they can install up to 5 per week. They haven't been getting the orders at that rate.
I asked this all. Sorry. I've asked this for quite a few months now, but are we actually going to get started before the cutoff date of July 31st?
I can't answer. I can't say yes to that because I have not received full applications to be part of the water market yet. So without any of those, we're not going to get up and running. But I will say the process to date has given us some lessons learned on how to operate a water market, and it has not been for naught. Just the logistics of dealing with the multi-partner effort that we're creating here between ourselves, the exchange administrator and the growers, and the AMI provider has been a learning experience for sure. There's been some complications with how to identify what not the units that are trade, but are we dealing with operators, or are we dealing with wells, or are we dealing with comm codes, and the comm codes themselves created some complexity. So we are on a learning curve through this process.
Thank you.
Anything further from the board? Anything, questions from the public? Thank you. Moving on to item number 7. I think I got that right. Advanced metering infrastructure status update.
Good afternoon, Chair West and directors. For the record, my name is Alma Quezada, groundwater specialist with the Watershed Protection District. And today I'm presenting an AMI update to highlight staff's work efforts toward AMI implementation. I put together a timeline of the work we've done so far, and I'm going to try and go through it pretty quick. It's not an eye test. So
you say. Thank you.
In early 2015, your board was considering additional cutbacks to agricultural pumping because the reduction targets were not being met. Your board decided it would not be practical to implement further cutbacks until extraction data for the 2014-15 crop year was submitted. In mid-2015, Semtech contacted the agency and proposed a proof of concept program for their smart metering network that had recently been developed. In August, your board authorized this proof of concept. In August, your board authorized staff to assist Semtech with their proof of concept program for AMI. Around the same time, staff began to meet with a group of growers to discuss extraction totals because agricultural reduction targets were not being met. The growers group recommended continuing to report under IAI, and together with staff developed a proposal that included AMI meters on all extraction facilities. The proposal to install AMI emerged as a measure to prevent further cutbacks as allowed under Emergency Ordinance E and to have accurate extraction data. The proposal that staff and the growers group put together was brought before your board in January and was passed unanimously. In February, Semtech began installing AMI technology on agency wells, and the proof of concept program began. In April, staff requested direction from the board to host a workshop for stakeholders and present a draft ordinance that would require AMI on all extraction facilities. Staff held the workshop in May and presented the draft ordinance to stakeholders, and then the stakeholder feedback was incorporated into the draft ordinance. The draft ordinance was presented to your board in May, and staff was directed to continue work on the ordinance and review comments. In July 2015, the AMI proof of concept that was in place at the time concluded, and the results were determined to be inconclusive due to the vendor providing prototype equipment. During the proof of concept program, staff was evaluating other AMI vendors to identify a cost-effective solution with broader capabilities. Staff's efforts identified 3 vendors with established technology that could potentially fulfill both the agency and the stakeholders' needs. Those vendors were invited to showcase their technology before a group of growers on August 11, 2016. The findings of that workshop were presented to the board in September, and your board directed staff to continue work on, your board directed staff to develop a proposal for AMI installation to the executive committee. Both staff and the water market presented updates to the executive committee in October and November. And then in December, staff came to the board with a proposal to implement a combined AMI water market pilot test in the Oxnard Basin. Your board has encouraged staff to seek out funding opportunities for AMI. And in December, staff partnered with the Nature Conservancy and Cal Lutheran University Center for Economic Research and Forecasting on a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That grant application was submitted in January of this year, and your board approved the grant commitment funding on January 25th. Announcement of awardees is expected soon, and if the Nature Conservancy is awarded the grant, it will provide the agency with federal funding for AMI implementation. So, in conclusion, AMI was initially proposed as an independent project and still is. It's currently being tested to assess development of an automatic reporting system that both the agency and stakeholders can have confidence in. Staff recognizes AMI implementation and a water market do not need to proceed simultaneously, and that while AMI is critical to developing a water market, the water market's not critical for AMI implementation. Your board's direction has been for staff to proceed with AMI independent of a water market. Staff also recognizes the agency cannot implement AMI without a new data management system. Staff is currently evaluating future data management needs to draft a request for proposal for a new data management system. And finally, staff intends to return to the board with recommendations for AMI implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
Questions?
I do. Question for you. What is the status, in your presentation there, you mentioned that there was a draft ordinance that was brought to the board for consideration, and that ordinance, I assume, was never actually adopted, that was taken back to staff. Is there any update as to when that may come towards us for consideration?
We don't have a date yet. It is still in draft, and it was reviewed by agency council at one time, but it's been in draft mode for a while. Perhaps it may be time to dust it off and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes.
There are a number of things we need to iron out first. You know, there's that issue, one size fits all versus buying independent. There's that need to be in that ordinance, so it won't be anytime soon.
Okay. Second question had to do with, if I remember correctly, there was concerns about property access in order to be able to install these on individuals that are not prone to volunteering for it. Has
Right.
that issue with access and accessibility been addressed?
We still need to discuss it further. It hasn't.
No, that's got to come to your board, and your board's got to weigh in on what they want to do with those who do not want access. So that'll be part of the ordinance discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate, and I really appreciate the fact that this board separated the installation of AMI from the market, because as she pointed out, the market needs the meters, but the metering does not require the market. But I'll tell you what does require meters, and that's responsible pumpers need to know that we really are metering and getting accurate data that's out there. You know, it's interesting. Years ago, I used to talk about, well, I think we need to meter because I'm not sure we're getting accurate. And people poo-pawed that. But now responsible pumpers are coming and saying there is cheating going on, and we want this. And so I think that's another example of where we really need to step up. So as soon as we get the grant, as soon as we find out whether we have the grant, we have one piece of information that would be helpful for us in terms of creating policy. But I do think we should move promptly on this. We should. I can't see any good reason why once we get the issues figured out, we shouldn't promptly start requiring that these meters be installed, because we can't do anything with this agency if we don't have accurate data on the pumping, and that's the only way we're going to have reliable, accurate data. There are issues, as Director Ronio pointed out, that we have to work out and wrestle. So I would just like to actually make a motion to direct staff to move promptly as possible so that we at least get this issue done, because we're going to have a lot of issues coming up in the fall. We should at least be moving promptly on this metering issue as promptly as possible.
I think you also need to have a Plan B in place in case the grant isn't awarded to the Nature Conservancy.
I'm not interested in creating Plan B because we're so close to finding out. If they do it, then we either plan with it or we plan without it. I'm willing to wait until we find out from the Nature Conservancy. But as soon as we find out about the grant, then let's get going about what is it that we need to get pulled together. So that'd be my.
So then we need to see some ordinance language and kind of wrestle that down.
Well, I actually think we need to have a policy discussion before we can, for example, you can't write the ordinance unless you either, are you going to say in the ordinance everybody has to do the same kind of meter, or everybody just has to do a meter that meets these, that can do these specifications? That's a policy decision, and it would be a waste of attorney time to have them crafting an ordinance one way if we have. So I think staff should, after they get the TMC stuff and to whatever, as soon as they figure out the data needs that they have, et cetera, they should bring those policy questions to us so that we can give them enough direction that they can then write a draft ordinance that we can then send out there and start to have people giving us input on.
Right, because the data management system that gets adopted could make a big difference.
Sure.
Concerning what types of meters might be workable.
And what you have in the ordinance.
Right.
Fine.
So I guess there's a motion then to
Yeah.
ask staff to return as expeditiously as possible with
Yeah,
draft ordinance language?
Promptly with the issues that we need to wrestle with so that they can take the next steps with requiring meters. Thank you.
I'd second that.
Let's meet a roll call.
Thank you.
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Yes.
Director Aronio,
Aye.
Director Borcher.
Yes.
Alma, don't go away too fast. There may be some questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions or comments for Alma about the AMI implementation plans?
My name is Martin Gramco, for those of you that don't know me. I do have one question or one comment relative to the AMI. I was one of the individuals that suggested maybe we should try a market. And I'm perfectly willing to be part of the market. I'm certainly at this point not part of it. The problem is I have a lot of meters, and the cost of ranch systems is pretty high. And I think we're looking at about $1,500 a meter, Jeff? Multiply that.
It was 2,000, but.
I thought it was a little higher myself.
Is it a little higher? So 2,000. All right, times 12, and that's just one grower. So if I were to invest in that meter system and then find out that the AMI ordinance essentially makes that meter, it's no longer eligible for AMI, it's a significant investment to simply put out there at risk. So to your comment, Steve, that would be nice to get some definition sooner than later about what does it mean to have, what do we have to, what criteria do we have to meet to have an AMI meter, whether it's ranch systems or something else.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's move on then to agenda item number 8. Authorizing the executive officer to submit comments to DWR concerning the Sustainable Groundwater Management Plan grant program.
Mr. Chair, Directors, Kim Loeb again with GMA staff. So, Department of Water Resources has issued their draft, what they call proposal solicitation package for this round of the Sustainable Groundwater Planning Grants, which is Prop 1 funded $100 million statewide for sustainable management planning. Ventura County Watershed Protection District, on behalf of the agency, obtained $250,000 for development of the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley GSPs in the first round that was in 2015, 2016, 2016 probably. It was before my time. Anyway, that grant is something that we're administering and receiving funds on. One of the things that this grant has separated out is they've identified Category 1 and Category 2 applicants. And Category 1 are severely disadvantaged communities, and they've provided $10 million for that. There is actually a special set aside for that within Prop 1 in terms of funding. And then they've set aside $15 to $30 million in this grant solicitation for Category 2, which is all other applicants other than severely disadvantaged. And Category 2, Tier 1 are the critically overdrafted basins. So again, that would be like Oxnard and Pleasant Valley here in the GMA. And then 46 to 61 million for all other high and medium priority basins. The draft proposed solicitation package looks at 2 grant application periods from August to October of this year, and then a second period from December to January of next year. The Category 1 applicants are eligible under the draft package to apply for various projects and things that they may need, including installing meters on groundwater production wells and installing monitoring wells with pressure transducers. Everyone else under the draft is restricted to just planning activities associated with developing the GSPs. We know through development of the GSPs and the work that the TAG is doing that we're going to be identifying a number of significant data gaps, and those will be prioritized with projects in nested monitoring wells with pressure transducers would be very useful to help address that. We had been hopeful that this grant application would give us an opportunity, this grant solicitation, to go after addressing some of those data gaps. So what we're suggesting and requesting is that the public comment period on the draft proposal solicitation package is open through June 19th, that your board authorized the executive officer to submit comments to the Department of Water Resources that GSAs that have adopted a GSP or are in development of GSP and have identified their data gaps be eligible to submit for funding for projects to address those data gaps.
Chair? It seems to me it's just almost, it must have been an oversight. There's no good reason not to have this. So I certainly support this action and would encourage, since we seem to have good relations with them, is encourage you to not only send a letter, but actually contact them and try to explain the situation to them. But certainly I'd move the recommended actions here.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We need a roll call?
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Arania?
Yes. Hurry up, we're falling off.
So, you ready to move on, Chair?
Yes, why don't we go ahead? I think we have a majority, so we can adopt it. All right.
So this item is an update on the unmanaged fringe areas. And hopefully they'll get my slides up here pretty quick from the booth. So as you know, SGMA requires all basins designated as by the state as high and medium priority to be managed, fully managed by a GSA by June 30th of this year. The Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin is fully covered between the GMA and the newly formed Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin GSA. However, there exist unmanaged fringe areas on the around all three of the other basins. Presently, no GSAs have been formed to cover those areas. Any local public agency that has water supply, water management, or land use responsibilities is in the basin is eligible to file as a GSA. I have a table that shows the various agencies that are that we identified that could be eligible under SGMA to file as a GSA. It's in the packet as well. And of those, we contacted every single one of them and asked them if they had intention of filing as a GSA. And two did, here we go. There's the map that shows in orange the areas that are fringe areas. A little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and then along here. And then, of course, the Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin is fully covered, and then into the Moore Park area in Los Pasos Basin. The red boundary is the GMA boundary, and then the blue are the state-designated basins. So here's that table. Of the agencies that we contacted, two of them did say that they had intended, or they do intend to file as GSAs within their service areas, within the fringe area, and that's Camarosa Water District and in all three basins. I left Camarosa off Oxnard in the staff report. That was there's a little piece of it in Oxnard. That was an oversight. And then Pleasant Valley County Water District in Oxnard and Pleasant Valley. So, whoops, jumped ahead a little quick. As discussed last month when Sam Bowen-Bryan from the state board was here, the county is the presumed or default GSA for any unmanaged areas after June 30th, and they'll have about 30 days to file if the county intends to take up those unmanaged areas after that. last month when Mr. Bolin Bryan spoke to your board, he did talk about that the makeup of the GSA in terms of the agencies that make it up could change after June 30th, and there are areas in the state that he's aware of where the county is stepping up and filing as a placeholder GSA, while the GSAs or the agencies that are ultimately going to form it are still in the process of getting together. So this figure shows the agency boundary again in red, and then the state boundary in blue, and the individual basin boundaries in different colors. And this horizontal stripe, that's the service area of Pleasant Valley County Water District, and then the vertical stripe is the service area of Camarosa Water District. So let's take a closer look at each one of those basins. So here in Pleasant Valley, you can see here's the fringe area that's outside of the GMA boundary, and Camarosa Water District covers this area, and then it's a little discontinuous and comes over into here, a little piece there, and then Pleasant Valley County Water District has a little piece right in there, and then the other pieces here are not covered by either one of those agencies. And similarly, here's the Oxnard Basin and the fringe area of the Oxnard. You have Pleasant Valley County Water District has these areas right in here. Camarosa covers that little piece in Oxnard, and then you have areas that are not covered by either one of those agencies. Whoops, I think I went backwards. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's Las Posas. I forgot. Las Posas, there is this little piece right in here where Camarosa Water District covers a fringe area, and a little piece right there, and then the rest of it is all not covered with Camarosa's service area. So it's important, as multiple GSAs would form inside the basin, to understand what Sigma requires for GSP submittal. The simplest and most straightforward is a single GSA with a GSP that covers the entire basin. We seem to be moving in this direction here, where we have more than one GSP form with a single GSP to cover the entire basin. And then the most complex scenario is multiple GSAs in the basin, each with its own GSP, which requires a coordination agreement between the GSAs. I don't know why I can't advance that all of a sudden. Is there another one there? Usually there's more than one. Maybe.
Can you point it at the, that's,
I don't know where the receiver is for it, but.
okay.
Huh.
Can you guys in the booth advance the screen?
They just cut you off.
There you go.
I guess I'm done. No, there's some important things we got to talk about here yet. All right, here we go. Let's see. The computer must have froze. So under Sigma, as I say, if there's multiple GSPs, there'd have to be a coordination agreement between the GSAs that the GSPs must utilize the same data and methodologies and elements necessary to achieve the sustainability goal for the basin must be based on consistent interpretations of the basin setting. There has to be a single point of contact for DWR, and the designated responsibilities of each agency and procedures for interagency communications and conflict resolution have to be defined. It has to describe how the agencies have used the same data and methodologies for groundwater elevation data, a coordinated water budget for the basin, and sustainable yield for the basin, supported by description of the undesirable results for the basin as a whole, and an explanation of how the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives defined by each GSP relate to those undesirable results. There has to be a coordinated data management system for the basin as a whole, and an explanation of how the coordinated GSPs implemented together satisfy the requirements of SIGMA and the GSP regulations. Failure to reach or implement the coordination agreement risks the entire basin being designated probationary by the state. So, as I mentioned, the Royal Santa Rosa Basin is fully covered by GSAs. In initial conversations with Camarosa and Pleasant Valley County Water District, at this time it's our understanding that they do not intend to prepare their own separate GSPs, but their GSAs would work with us under the agency's GSP. If that changed, then the agency's GSPs would need to be modified and a coordination agreement developed if either agency changed their mind on that. These areas could be managed differently if appropriate and desired by your board as management areas, and that's already under consideration in certain areas of certain basins where the hydrogeology is different, and so that could be a way to handle it. In terms of options for GSA formation, we would recommend for the areas that are uncovered by any agency that's stepping up to encourage the county to file for the unmanaged areas after June 30th and then enter into the agreement with the agency to manage those, for the agency to manage those areas as the basin as a whole. For the fringe areas on the eastern Las Posas, Oxnard, and Pleasant Valley basins, there's really three actions or options that your board could consider. And the first is not to take any action, just allow those agencies to move forward in their service areas and develop their GSAs and then work with them. The second option is to see if those agencies are interested in forming a GSA with the agency and the county. The county would have to be involved to cover those other areas that are outside of their service areas. Likely that couldn't be done by the June 30th timeframe, but an option could be to enter into a memorandum of understanding that was what the intent of the parties were, ask the county to file as a temporary GSA to turn it over to any new GSA that formed. The last option that your board could consider is asking the county to file as a GSA in those areas, which would cause an overlap and would cause nobody who filed to be the GSA, and that would provide further time for negotiation, but it has a certain number of risks because any area, unmanaged area of the basin could cause the entire basin to be designated as probationary, although we think that risk is probably small in the short term. We don't know if the county would be willing to do that, and the county would no longer be the default GSA if it was unmanaged. One of the things I meant to mention, and I got a little out of order in terms of the slides threw me a little bit. One of the challenges I think that your board ought to recognize with multiple GSAs managing different parts of the basin is the ordinances, regulations, and rules might be different for different areas of the basin. So those small areas outside the GMA may have that. Fees may be different. Groundwater replenishment fees may be different, or those agencies may decide they don't want to implement replenishment fees. Basin-wide projects may be more challenging if the small GSAs decide they don't want to participate in helping fund basin-wide water supply projects. So those are some of the challenges and options. Staff does not have a recommendation for you. We just wanted to point out what we see in terms of the challenges and opportunities moving forward.
Question on the item number 1, the unmanaged areas. Are you talking about all the unmanaged areas or those areas that remain unmanaged after June 30th, 2017?
Correct, the latter, the unmanaged areas after June 30th. So that would be anything that is just in a area like these that's not within the service area of those other agencies that are intending for. We think that's kind of a no-brainer, and that way we will bring them in. They have to be managed.
Oh, I understand. No, I just wanted to understand it. I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing. That's
yes.
All. Sometimes a question, just a question.
I have questions.
Any
I don't know if there's
questions?
any comments? Are there comments of anybody first?
Okay. Questions or comments from the general audience?
I guess the fundamental question I have, I'm fine with other people, with other agencies stepping forward, as long as we know we're going to have, smooth coordination of edge matching. Because I think staff rightfully points out, we set a high replenishment fee, and somebody who's pulling the same water, but just as for technical reasons is right outside the boundary, and then the other one, and they don't want to do that same fee. So I would think that the good government action for us here is to not try to get the county any more involved than we have to, but to have the county be there to make sure we get those good agreements, that good cooperation with them. But I don't walk into this one feeling really strongly. I just would like to. I think it's in everybody's interest to try to have this be as consistent as possible across the different jurisdictional lines when you're talking about the same water. How to accomplish that, I sort of look to my colleagues to see what your thoughts are about how to best accomplish that.
Fortunately, the only two agencies that have stepped up so far already are integrally involved in this process and in the GSP development within the agency. So I wouldn't imagine that the process in these outlying areas will be a whole lot different than the process inside the GMA boundaries, but maybe that's just being Pollyannish. I don't know. Jeff, did you have a question?
The reason we presented this to your board this time and the time before was you're passing the drop dead date.
Right.
So if you the nuclear option, we're calling it C, this is your last chance to use that. After this, those two agencies, although they've indicated they are not going to develop a GSP, that will still remain an option to them. And if they choose to exercise it because they don't like replenishment fees, ordinances, AMI, whatever it is in the plan that your board adopts, then there's a coordination agreement required. And if the coordination agreement can't be achieved, then it goes to just the same place the nuclear option takes it, back into the whole basin, goes into probation. So those are just kind of, wanted to make sure you understood the risks and the consequences of those actions, because they're not abundantly clear when you talk to DWR.
Well, it seems to me, though, I kind of agree with Kim that option 1 is sort of a no-brainer, that, come July 1, the county should go ahead and file to be the GSA in all the areas that have not otherwise been filed on, that are in those outlying areas, in those fringe areas. And then as the plan process develops, we will coordinate or do whatever we need to do in order to make those plans seamless. And if need be, I'll make that a motion. No, go right ahead then. I'll step back. Robert Aranio has made a motion to adopt option number 1. Is there a second?
I just want to be clear. Option number 1 also says would be encourage the county to do this, and then I assume that means also option 2A, which is take no action and work with new GSAs.
I think that's inherent in number 1, but.
Well, as I envisioned presenting it, I thought these two were mutually independent. The option 1, but you could combine them. That's your.
Option one only takes care, only addresses what we do. We're going to have to do another motion if we do that, but that's fine. I don't mind doing two motions, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Let's start with the one motion
All
that
right.
Robert made. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, need a vote then, please?
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Yes.
Director Aronio,
Aye.
Director Borchert.
Yes.
With respect to the second motion, it did seem to me that if indeed we wind up with more than one GSA within that portion of the basin, then 2A is inevitable. That's going to have to happen, but I don't know if we need that as a motion or not, but I don't have any opposition to it.
Well, in 2A, there's two, well, I guess 2A still.
Oh, I see, okay.
Has two.
The
Can you
take
go
no
back to-
action
Can
part.
you go back to that slide that shows that?
The take no action part, I guess, would be usurped by the last motion.
Just to make sure I'm not sure we've been clear with the staff. So 2A could be either the second or the third thing there.
Right, I see.
And so we're not sure which way it's going to take. Obviously, the second one is a no-brainer, but the third one could present your board problems later. So that's the issue.
What's the difference between 2A and 2B in terms of the options for us? One is work with them, and the other is
One
take
is-
no action, but work with them.
Well, two is if there's multiple GSAs, but a single GSP. 3 is if there are multiple GSPs.
And multiple GSAs.
And multiple GSAs inevitably, yeah.
But we don't know that at this point in time.
Right.
No, but that's going to be an option that will be in their hands, not yours.
If we do A or if we do B, or maybe.
If you do 2A.
And if we do 2B, we work with the agencies to see if there's an interest.
That option's kind of gone. The time has passed, so we presented it, but it's,
So we don't have any other choice except 2A, right?
Yeah, 2A or 2C.
Well, except without the take no action, because we've already asked that the county file. So we can't ask them now to take no action. But I guess the question is basically, does the board want to give direction?
This says take no action with the new GSAs formed by Camrosa and PV. Up on top, it was encourage the county to file where nobody has filed.
Right.
Right, so they're
Right, so
two different.
it would be the remainder, it would not include the service areas of Camrose and PV, provided their boards do choose to move forward with that and file.
Assuming that to be the case, then 2A would simply instruct staff to work with those new GSAs to work out
Coordination.
Right, so 2A is really a no action, I don't know that we need
I don't think that you have to do that
a
anyway.
board action for no action, but I'll defer to council.
Work with the new GSAs formed by them, you're going to have to, but they're
Right.
telling you to work with them.
Well,
I don't think we need a motion for that. No, I think if indeed they form, you'll have to work with them because you will be managing part of those areas as well.
Well, we'll want to be working with them.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. We're just discussing procedurally whether we need a motion or not, that's all.
Councilor wants to speak also.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have got lost there. And as part of the discussion, just to clarify, when you're talking about Camrosa and Pleasant Valley filing to be the GSA, you're talking about for the areas within their service territories, right? Because you've got the Las Posas Valley there, and your map showed that Camrosa is a very small portion of that.
Right.
So they would be the GSA just for that very small portion of the Las Posas.
This little piece right here and that
Right.
little area right in there.
So
But the answer to your question is yes.
So the bulk of the Las Posas Basin would fall under option one, which would be an unmanaged area for the county. The other clarification is when you say that, I don't know if it was with respect to both of those agencies, just Pleasant Valley, that they did not intend to adopt their own GSP, which is a requirement under SGMA. Are you saying that they will adopt the GMA's GSP with respect to the areas that fall within their territory? Because if they're, yeah.
That's my understanding, although it's early in the process for them.
Because I don't think they have the option of not adopting a sustainability plan.
No, they would have to adopt, I mean, it would, exactly.
You're right. No, you're right. There's going to have to be a plan that covers the entire basin, whether it's one plan, multiple plans, the entire basin's going to have to be covered by plans.
Correct.
To make it simple, I would motion that we approve 2A just because it directs staff to work with them and we'll just trust the process as it goes forward. We're going to work with coordination agreements. we get 2A whether we take no action or not. I'm just trying to.
Well, except the take no action would vitiate the instructions we just gave the county.
No.
Would it not?
No, let's take no action on the new GSAs formed by Camrosa. The one, number one above says, ask the county to file in all the areas where like Camrosa and PV don't file.
Okay.
This is in, now work with them for new GSAs in the areas that they do file.
So what it says, I guess what I'm having trouble understanding.
I'm fine, I'll withdraw the motion. If we do nothing, we still get 2A, okay?
Understood, no, I understood.
Yeah.
I guess what I was having trouble understanding is for the fringe areas on the eastern Las Posas Valley, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley basins, don't those include those same unmanaged areas referred to in number one above? Just by definition.
No, because those areas will be, the areas within the service areas of Camrosa and Pleasant Valley County, presuming they move forward and file, will now be managed as of June 30th.
But they're still fringe areas.
They're still fringe areas.
And that's
but-
what 2A, that's what 2 says. It talks about fringe areas, not unmanaged fringe areas.
Correct. Presently, they're unmanaged.
Understood.
Because they've not taken any action. but-
Understood.
Okay.
Okay. So is there or is there not a motion?
It doesn't matter whether we do the motion or not.
Well, okay. I'll
Any
try
other-
and make it more complicated next time.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
You did fine.
That's
Okay.
right.
You lost the ability to focus.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? All right, we need a, we have an executive officer's report. I guess we need a motion to receive and file that.
Move, receive, and file.
Second, all in favor? We're adjourned, thank you. Sorry about making that so confusing, I just, those, the different phrases, I guess, confusing. It's,